Welcome to the Lost Vet podcast, where we are helping you to get back to your passion and purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Melodie Chan, and in today's episode, this is the final part of a 3-part series on 12 ways to retain talent. This is my continued conversation with Victoria Bond, so if you haven't listened to the last 2 episodes, press pause, go back and have a listen so the whole thing makes sense. In part 2, Victoria covered off the importance of culture and engagement, diversity, inclusion, well-being, and safe spaces, career management and personal growth, and the importance of great leadership. To hear the final points that are important in retaining great talent, have a listen.
So next is about kind of recognition and rewards. So this is about actually this is about celebrating the right things in your organization, celebrating those successes, making sure that you've got a way that you do this in your organization. And I'm really thinking about, am I rewarding the right things, and are we celebrating the right things, and is that promoting engagement and culture? I'll give you an example. So I used to work with an organization who, every time a sale was made, there was an email that went round. There's a big hoo-ha. Everyone was like, oh my God, that salesperson's incredible. And because of the role that I was in that HR role, I also had the customer service team, who the poor lambs were responsible for delivering what this salesperson had sold, who was saying, well, what about us? What about us and our role in delivering this, because that salesperson can't sell that if we can't deliver it. So it's, what I'm not saying there is don't celebrate the wins, etc., of the salespeople. What I'm saying is, make sure that if you've got some kind of recognition scheme, and you should have, where you're celebrating successes in the organisation, make sure that is well-rounded. Make sure it's inclusive of everybody in your organisation, no matter the part that they play. And make sure that it isn't just revenue based, because not everybody is in a revenue generating role. Mm-hmm. Because there's nothing kind of more divisive in an organisation than where we're only celebrating the heroes who got that over the line at the end of the month, or whatever, versus those kind of I think this is a British term, steady eddies, where, those people who just come in every day, do an awesome job, just really solid, go home. But maybe because they're not got the hero behaviour, they get overlooked. And actually those steady eddies will sneak off at some point, and you'll really miss them.
Mm-hmm. Any great ideas of things you've seen in organizations to celebrate, not this performance-based rewards, but that, again, the Steady Eddie Award, if you will, those that do help support the business and the organization day to day, because they're dependable.
Yeah, exactly. So often the best kind of reward recognition stuff, what's nice to do, sorry, I'm fluffing around this, is to link it to your values in your organization. And often there'll be a value that kind of relates to, customer service or something, where you can kind of relate that back to those steady eddies, and I think if you are relating your kind of recognition program back to your values, then that can be really inclusive, because there will be great examples of all of your roles within your organization that comes back to that. And what you want the outcome for the reward to be is up to you, whether you want it to be a clap in the office, or you want it to be monetary. It doesn't really matter, as long as it works for your organization. Mm-hmm. But yeah, often linking them to values is a good way to go.
Good. Great. Mm-hmm. So we've got recognition and reward.
Okay. And so next is about organizational design. So this is really about we kind of talked about before that, particularly in a small organization, it can be hard to create those opportunities for people in terms of kind of career development, etc., because we haven't got an endless list of vacancies that we can kind of shuffle people around in. So this is about kind of saying, when you do have an opportunity, maybe somebody leaves or you win a new piece of business and you need to expand the team, etc., to just go through that opportunity to kind of have a look at your structure of your organisation, the organisational design, as I would call it, and to make sure to be thinking about retention when you do that. So are there people who have been in a role a long time and needed a change? Are there, people who deserve a different opportunity? Are there people who actually have shown me leadership potential that I think should be managing a team, etc.? So just thinking about taking that opportunity to think about retention, to create those opportunities for people when they present themselves, and that can often be about a little bit of shuffling of an organisational design.
Mm-hmm. I had one guest share in their clinic how they did this too, was also have people on the teams nominate who they would suggest for some of these new roles. And it was brilliant, because then a lot of the time, because of the culture they had built, those names matched what this individual who's managing that space, what ideas she had came, the names matched on those lists, so that you've got buy-in on both sides.
I love that, because sometimes it can be really hard to move into a different role because you've got those kind of peer relationships to navigate as well. And I think doing that with the blessing of your peers is just gorgeous. Yeah, 10 out of 10 on that one.
I thought that was brilliant. I've also too had the chance to coach some individuals and lead some individuals that don't want to move into people management roles or more responsibility roles. And for me, it actually was a bit of an exercise in understanding, okay, not everybody is driven to want these things that maybe I would want for various reasons, right? It might not be the right time of life. They might just be busy. They may just genuinely not want to do that other role that we view as, oh, but this is a move up. Why would you not want to take it?
Yeah.
And I think for me, the learning in there was, you also need these individuals that want to stay in that role.
Yeah.
But you have to make sure that they are engaged. I think that piece is, as you've discussed, is even if they're in the same role and they want to excel at that role, this is where that art of career development comes in. You also have to make sure that you are creating opportunities where they can continue to learn and grow in that role and keep them engaged.
Yeah, definitely. And there's so much value in a really talented individual contributor. And we need to uncouple that kind of status and success from managing people. We have a phrase that we talk about in our business that's don't take your best player off the pitch.
Yes.
Not everybody wants to your point, or to, should be a people leader. And, again, we work with many organisations who kind of taken the best player off the pitch, and then they wonder why performance has dropped. So they wonder why they end up losing that leader. And it's because it kind of forced them into this kind of way that they didn't really want to go. And they've ended up losing that person as a result, or the performance across the team has dropped because they shouldn't be in a leadership role.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see that too. So organizational design, sort of recognizing that in smaller businesses, smaller vet clinics, this is challenging, but there are ways, again, to make sure your people continue to develop and grow in their roles.
Yeah, absolutely. So next is about using data to prevent turnover and kind of using that as indicating kind of signs. So again, I don't want to kind of keep talking about surveys, but for example, in surveys that we do, we often ask the question, do you see yourself in this organisation in 12 months' time, 2 years' time? And what that's giving us is kind of like a risk factor for retention. And that's giving us some data points, because we can kind of say, right, well, oh my goodness, a third of our organisation don't see themselves here in 12 months' time. We've got some work to do. We either need to lock those people in or we need to do some succession planning.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's that kind of data. There's also other signs that people might be giving out when they're thinking of leaving. So if their performance has dropped, doesn't necessarily need to be suddenly, but if their kind of performance has tailed off over a period of time, and you can kind of quite often organisations can see that in data that they have. Also, maybe potentially absence, and the amount of time that they're taking off. Lateness sometimes, where it's kind of extreme late, where essentially what I'm trying to say is where you can kind of see that somebody has checked out. And actually it kind of comes back to a point that you made earlier. I don't believe that any resignation in an organisation should be a surprise. If we're close enough to our employees, a resignation is either going to be something about personal circumstances, they're making a move, or they've lost a family member, or they've picked up a caring responsibility. We should know about that because we're caring about our employees' well-being. Or we've been helping them with their career, and like you said before, we've got to the point where we don't have any opportunities for them in the organisation. So and so we know that they're going to be looking elsewhere, or we know that there's something where their engagement has dropped and we're working on it with them to kind of try and address that. So there shouldn't be, if we're doing it right, there shouldn't be a point where there's a surprise resignation letter on our desk, because we should know our employees and where they're at. And again, some of that stuff we can't prevent. We haven't got a career opportunity for them, or that culture just isn't for them anymore. Fine, let's do that succession planning so that and I'll kind of talk about that next, when we get that resignation letter in, we've already got a plan B, and it's not as big a thing.
Yeah. For the surveys, how often do you recommend these pulse checks be done in an organization?
Okay, so what I tend to recommend is do a quarterly engagement survey that takes no more than 5 minutes to do, but make it hyper relevant to what's going on in the organisation at that time. So that might look like 10, 12 questions that we're doing a quick check-in with the employees, but we're doing it on a regular basis. It might be that we've got a couple of questions in there that are kind of data points that we're tracking over time, so we can kind of make sure that nothing's changing. But then it might be that we're also asking for really kind of hyper relevant feedback from the employees, so they feel like they've got a voice and an opportunity to share anything that's on their mind. So, if we've just been through a big change, tell us about the big change. Is there anything that you feel like we've not landed? Is there anything else that we need to do? So really kind of making those engagement surveys meaningful for those employees, and giving them a reason to complete them, I guess. But I would say on kind of a quarterly basis, and then if your organisation is big enough, doing some segmentation there so that you can kind of get a feel for the difference between teams or the difference between layers within your organisation.
What I'm hearing is make sure they're timely and relevant, because I know organizations that this is the time of year, and so it's just done. But I like this idea of tailoring it to what's happening right now.
Yeah, and also there is. You're absolutely right. Those enormous, great big surveys that are asking 150 data points that everybody, it takes that long to get the analysis back. Everybody just kind of goes, oh, we moved on since then, slips it in a drawer and hopes that nobody ever mentions it again, because they're all completely overwhelmed with the data. And nothing has literally changed from one survey to the next, and the next one comes around and the employee's like, I've already told you that I was annoyed in this area, and nothing changed since. Again, it's another good way to kind of go, hi employees, I don't respect or value your opinion, and it's a surefire way to kind of get your attrition figures up.
No, that's fair. So is succession planning the next one, or am I skipping ahead?
It is, yeah. So succession planning. So what that means for anyone who kind of hasn't got this in mind is, what I would really encourage you to do is, as an organisation or as a team, have a really clear view on who your talent are in your organisation, and what opportunities you might need to be creating for those people. Um, so that you can kind of, as a leadership team, move, create those opportunities for people that, as we've said, leads to retention. But also that on a regular basis you're doing that risk assessment of those people that you think might be leaving. So you can, what we tend to do is kind of do a bit of a red, amber, green. And what you might want to do is kind of say, right, I think this person's like a 5 out of 5 risk for leaving. And actually, there are 5 out of 5 risk for our organisation if they go, because they're a key person dependency and they've got a specific, piece of knowledge that we really need, and we'll find it hard to replace. So actually, what we might need to do there is put like a kind of a bind strategy around that person. So in the UK, I'd be kind of advising, what's their notice period? What's their contracts? Have they got that career stuff in place? Are we doing all that other good stuff that we talked about? What's their salary like? When's the last time that we reviewed that? Can we put a retention bonus in place for them? What could we do potentially to lock them in for maybe another 12 months? Because particularly when it comes to salary increases, etc., it only buys you a certain amount of time.
Right.
But if we think that that person's going to go, what can we do to buy ourselves a bit more time so that we can de-risk that person? So that's kind of what I mean in terms of kind of succession and talent planning. So some of it is about really targeted retention actions to kind of say, we can't afford to lose this person. What do we do about it? But also recognising that, once somebody's got a foot out the door, sometimes it is best that they go. If they've got the ick about the organisation, as I would call it, you're on a short time scale. So that succession planning process allows you to kind of really understand what is the impact of that person going, and what do we need to do in order to kind of make sure that we de-risk that organisation. So that person, and that kind of knowledge, often, who do they need to spend time with? Who do they need to mentor? Who do we need to talent pipeline externally so that we've got somebody potentially who could just step into that role to backfill. Yeah.
I think that's a really key piece, because it's not only identifying the individual, it's identifying those areas of knowledge that are held only by one person, and it's a high risk for a business, and making sure that that information is shared outside, and that people can be that you can be replaced. And I think it's a challenge as a leader, or even an individual who feels like they are super key, and it's a bit of their power that they hold. It's a mind shift to think about, how can I make sure I am replaceable, and approach it from a place of sharing, just to make sure that the people around you will be okay. It also allows you to go on holidays.
I was just about to say, actually, sell it to that, if that individual is being precious, and I get that, I totally get that. Sell it to them that they can go on holiday without the guilt and the concern, or they can, they can take a sick day without, everything falling down around their ears. There's a really good kind of sell to, and actually, if they do want to move on in the organisation, it's really unlikely that that opportunity is going to be created for them until they've got somebody who can come up and do their role. So they might be their own blocker to success by holding on to stuff.
It also comes back to that idea of creating that safe space, and realizing, some people come from that place of being insecure, that they're worried if they share this info, they'll no longer be relevant in the information in the organization. And just, again, being able to dig down and figure out what might be motivating somebody from holding key information or key skills, and working forward that way. But yeah, succession planning, I think, is often it's a tough one, especially for veterinarians or veterinary clinics, because you've built this brand, you've built your brand, you've built your following, you've built your clients, and it's hard to think of yourself as being replaceable. But
Yeah.
that exercise, I think, is very important to make sure that you have that space to have your own life too, outside of the work.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Good.
So my final point is about
Okay.
what happens when the worst happens and you get that resignation. So here I wanted to talk about, so let me give you a story. So a really good friend of mine is a solicitor, obviously we're a different industry. She handed in her notice and had a 3-month notice period that they made her work, and during that entire time her line manager never spoke a word to her during her 3 months notice period. Really like punishing this person for leaving. So we've already talked about the fact that, sometimes we need to let people go with our blessing. We've talked actually about when we're declining candidates, that when people go, you've given them some negative feedback because they didn't get the job, but actually also, in this instance, from that kind of exiting people, what we need to think about is exiting them as really respectfully and as a great leaver, unless obviously they're a bad leaver and they've done something that they shouldn't be proud of. But if they're a good leaver, so what we need to think about is, when they leave, they will talk about our organisation, and we want them to say good things, because one, we might want them to come back in the future, but two, we want to kind of build up our employer brand. We want them to go and say, I had a really great experience there. That was kind of, a really important part of my career. If you're thinking of applying for there, absolutely, I'd recommend them, because that's where the kind of the fresh talent comes from. But also, I think about the way that you treat those leavers. Other people in your team are going to be observing that, and again, it's an opportunity to show who you are as who you truly are as an organisation, to kind of say, actually, if we celebrate this person's success, they've got a new role, we're so sad to see them go, we want to thank them for everything that they've done, etc. That's going to create a much better environment for our people who aren't leaving, because I've seen it where somebody's left and there's been a domino effect, and it's almost kind of spooked a number of people, and we've lost, multiple people at the same time. Mm-hmm. I'm not necessarily saying that was because of that exit happening, but what you don't want to do is start that domino effect. We need to be really respectful of leavers. They've contributed to our organisation positively. We should be really proud of them, like we talked about, in terms of where they go next. But just think about that impact of kind of how we treat leavers. Think about it on your employer brand. Think about it on your, your existing engagement.
Yeah. What are your thoughts around exit interviews?
Oh, really good question. We do loads of exit interviews, and I think they are, what I would say, if you're doing exit interviews, if you can, I would take it out of the organisation. So we do them on behalf of other organisations, for example. Oh, and okay. The kind of the feedback that we get is that we've really got to the heart of what's happening. Yeah. Because even if, someone allegedly neutral, like right. HR or somebody, that they never really are. Also, the other thing that I would consider, one of the things that we do is we ask permission to then go back in 3 months' time and go and ask them again. So it's not always the same questions, but if you think about somebody fresh leaving an organisation, might have some very different, some more extreme kind of opinions, and somebody who's kind of moved on, the dust is settled, and what we'll often do is we'll go back in 3 months' time and go, right, what are your lasting impressions? What was really important? Yeah. What does this organisation need to know about why they lost you? Now that you've had a couple of months to reflect, and if you've got the if you've got the resource to do that, I would really encourage you to go and do that, because it can be really valuable and insightful.
Mm-hmm. That's a great one. I think I don't think I've seen when they are done that they are taken from a third party. So I think
Yeah,
that even that tip is a good one. And I do think they're valuable in helping an organization just reflect on, what are some of the areas, perhaps more candidly, if there isn't that culture of openness, where that can be improved.
absolutely. Yeah,
Good.
it can be really insightful. Yeah,
Yeah.
as long as you don't sulk about the feedback that you get, and you're
Yeah.
genuinely going to listen about
Yeah.
it.
Well, this has been wonderful. I actually can see all of those points, as you sort of pointed out, tying back to that third item you had mentioned of just the values, vision, mission, and purpose.
Yeah.
And if you're clear on that, and they're actually something that the organization and the people within live and breathe every day,
Mm.
then that becomes your guiding principle for everything else, within that idea of retention.
Absolutely. And yeah, don't just share that with your new starters. Make sure that that is a red thread that runs through your organization.
Yeah. Well, this has been a wonderful 3-part series, Victoria. Any final thoughts you want to share with our listeners on this idea of retention?
I think, do you know what? I think just be proactive about it. Kind of remember that thought about, if you aren't proactively managing this scenario, it will manage you. And it can be really quite stressful losing people and good talent out of your organization. So I'd really encourage you to kind of go and do a bit of a health check on where you think you are, and do a bit of an action plan if you feel like you need one.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I have a feeling this won't be the last time we speak on this pod.
Thank you for guiding me through it.
In this last conversation I had with Victoria, as we wrap up our 12 ways to retain talent, we went through 5 more points in how to accomplish this. We started the conversation off in talking about recognition and reward, and keeping in mind that we're rewarding the right things, and thinking about that everybody in the organization can be included in being recognized in some way. And so it's not so much about what you're doing as much as making sure everyone feels like they can be told and are being told they're doing a great job, they're doing something that is helping to support, make a difference with the values, vision, mission, and purpose of the organization. So that's something, again, to revisit and make sure that we're celebrating the small wins as well as the big ones in our own little ways. The next piece she talked about was organizational design. And again, recognizing that this can be challenging for smaller businesses, but this is where we focus on how can people grow and develop within your organization. And it doesn't always have to be just title changes or moving up in a hierarchy. Again, there may not be that many spaces, but thinking about how can a person feel like they're advancing if that is something that is of interest to them. So is there a new skill? Is there a new area within your veterinary clinic that somebody could help support? Is there someone who's shown leadership initiatives or wanting to be a leader, take on more of a leadership role? And so are there areas in the practice that you can also have them move towards, or show them that this is another space that they can be in? And this is where it's a little challenging at times when you're smaller, but being creative and talking to other businesses to think about what they've done, and also talking to individuals to understand what is it that they think they want to do, and having the conversations of how do they want to get there. So if you have an individual that's super keen on being and taking on more responsibility and leading people, having the conversation with them to understand why what's the driver there, and then also have them come up with some ideas of how they think they can be better prepared if and when that role comes up. The next piece we talked about was using data to prevent turnovers. And so we can think about, again, surveys and making sure that these are timely and relevant. So this is a constant pulse check. It shouldn't be onerous for individuals in the organization to fill. But think about if you've just had a big change in leadership, or a big change in the structure, or a change in way you do your intakes in the morning, or a change in how appointments are scheduled in the day. Having a quick pulse check survey and checking in with the people to see what's working, what's not working, any suggestions, any pain points that we aren't seeing that are blind spots that we could help to improve. The next one we moved to was succession planning. And so again, thinking about doing it's a risk assessment essentially for your business, and thinking about, if someone was to move on or something was to happen, who would be the next person that would take over, especially if it's an important role or a very key role or a very specialized role. And I'm a big fan of organizations not having individual positions where only one person knows how certain things work, because it really just puts your whole business at a disadvantage and at the mercy of just one person. And for the individuals to come with that mindset of absolutely share your knowledge. Like, what better way to continue to have an impact than to bring someone into your fold, especially if you have a really specialized skill in a certain space. And we joked, but I actually think this is really true. You want to make sure other people can do your role, so you can take a break, that you can step away, that you can walk away, have a refresh and a relax moment for yourself, whether it's holidays or even just the weekend, so you're not feeling guilty that you haven't done or you're not there because you're the only one that can do a certain thing. So that's important in that idea of succession planning. And finally, the last point we talked about was resignation, and what that whole resignation process feels like for an individual that is leaving your organization. So we started from the recruitment process, moved right through. Again, to me, that anchor is the values, vision, mission, and purpose of the organization, and tying it right through to that idea of succession planning and resignation. I hope you found these episodes, this 3-part series, helpful for you, and that it gave you some ideas for how to think about your retention strategy and your retention program for your business. Thanks for listening. Until next time.